accountable for the crime that he did. So for that, I am grateful. I want my
On a quiet night in Highland Park, Michigan, the hum of life carried on as usual at the Woodward Inn, a modest hotel where guests came and went unnoticed. But that night, in room 214, something happened that would leave an indelible mark on the community. A young woman, vibrant and full of promise, was found lifeless. Her name was Ashia Davis, a 34-year-old who had just started to see her dreams materialize. She had a heart that inspired those around her. But in the early hours of June 1st, 2023, her life came to a sudden, violent end, leaving questions that demanded answers. What brought Ashia to this hotel? Who could commit such an unthinkable act? And most hauntingly, why did this happen to her? Tonight, we unravel the story of Ashia Davis, a woman whose light was extinguished far too soon in a crime that shocked everyone who knew her. This is the story of Ashia Davis, a story of resilience, prejudice, and a community demanding justice. Ashia Davis was the kind of person who could light up a room with her presence. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, she grew up in a city that was rich in culture but often challenged by hardship. Yet, no matter the struggles around her, Ashia remained steadfast in her determination to build a meaningful and purposeful life. Her friends described her as deeply caring, someone who made everyone feel seen and valued. At 34 years old, Ashia had reached a pivotal moment in her life. She had recently graduated from nursing school, an achievement she worked tirelessly for. Imagine that sense of pride after years of hard work and sacrifice, finally holding that diploma in your hands. What do you think it must have felt like for Ashia to achieve something so monumental, knowing the obstacles she had to overcome? For Ashia, this wasn't just a career path, it was a calling. Nursing was her way of giving back, of using her natural compassion to care for others in their most vulnerable moments. Her friends often said that Ashia had a gift for turning strangers into family. If you've ever met someone who made you feel truly seen and cared for, you'll understand the kind of person Ashia was. Her faith was another cornerstone of her life. Ashia was a devout Christian, and her spirituality shaped much of her worldview. She volunteered at her church, helped organize community events, and often offered her time to anyone in need. How many of us know someone who always seems to have enough energy to give, no matter how much they're dealing with themselves? That was Ashia, a constant source of strength and kindness. But Ashia's life wasn't without challenges. As a Black transgender woman, she faced discrimination and bias that many of us will never fully understand. Yet, she carried herself with dignity and grace, refusing to let prejudice define her. It takes incredible strength to live authentically in a world that can be unkind to those who are different. If you were in her position, how would you find the courage to keep going? Detroit was home for Ashia, a city of contrasts where beauty and struggle coexisted. She loved her community, despite its challenges, and often spoke about wanting to give back to the city that had shaped her. It was here, amidst the bustling streets and tight-knit neighborhoods, that Ashia found her sense of purpose. Have you ever felt such a deep connection to a place that it feels like an extension of yourself? Her closest friends recall her laugh, a sound so warm and infectious that it could pull anyone out of a bad mood. They remember her love for music, especially gospel songs that resonated with her faith. And then there was her little Yorkie Clyde, her constant companion. Ashia adored him, often joking that Clyde was the only one who could keep up with her energy. Do you have a pet or a companion who brings you the kind of joy that Ashia found in Clyde? Her journey to nursing school wasn't easy. It took years of hard work, late nights, and unwavering perseverance. But Ashia was never one to back down from a challenge. When she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, it wasn't just a moment of personal triumph, it was a victory for everyone who had doubted her, and for everyone who had supported her along the way. If you've ever achieved something after overcoming incredible odds, you know just how meaningful that moment must have been for her. Ashia's accomplishments were a source of pride not just for herself, but for her family and friends. They celebrated her success as if it were their own because they knew how much she had sacrificed to get there. If you've ever cheered on a loved one who accomplished something extraordinary, you'll understand how much Ashia meant to the people in her life. Despite the joy she brought to others and the milestones she achieved, Ashia was all too aware of the dangers she faced as a black transgender woman, but she refused to let fear dictate her life. She stood tall, proud of who she was, and determined to live authentically, no matter the cost. How do you think we, as a society, can create a world where people like Ashia don't have to live in fear? Ashia's story is one of resilience, kindness, and unwavering faith in the goodness of people. She left an impact on everyone she met, a legacy that far outweighs the years she lived. What do you think we can learn from the way Ashia lived her life? On June 1st, 2023, Ashia Davis walked into the Woodward Inn in Highland Park, Michigan. It was an ordinary check-in at a modest hotel, yet it would tragically be the last place she would ever be seen alive. The day had begun like any other, but by nightfall, Ashia's life was cut short, leaving behind unanswered questions and an immeasurable void in the lives of those who loved her. Ashia arrived carrying a small bag, her demeanor calm and composed as she made her way to room 214. Surveillance footage captured her entering the hotel lobby, pausing briefly at the front desk to collect her room key. For anyone else, this might have been an uneventful moment, but knowing what we do now, it's impossible not to wonder what was going through her mind. Was she excited about her future, or perhaps just relieved to rest after a long day? Later that evening, another figure appeared on the hotel's camera. 17-year-old Carlos Lamar Scotland was seen entering the building quickly, avoiding eye contact with staff. Scotland didn't linger. He walked directly to the second floor, his movements purposeful, as if he already knew where he was going. Was this a premeditated encounter? Or was he there for reasons we may never fully understand? At approximately 11:15 p.m., guests reported hearing a loud pop-e, a noise that broke the silence of the night. It was faint, almost easy to ignore, but for those close enough to hear it, it was unmistakable. Moments later, Scotland was seen on the same surveillance cameras, leaving the hotel. This time, his movements were different, hurried, almost panicked. His head was down, his hood still up, as he exited into the night. The next morning, housekeeping staff made a horrifying discovery. Inside room 214, they found Ashia's lifeless body. She had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head. For police, the task was clear: find out what happened to 34-year-old Ashia Davis, a vibrant black transgender woman whose life had been cut short by a single gunshot. But as the investigation began, the questions outnumbered the answers, and the path to justice would be anything but simple. At first glance, the crime scene painted a grim picture. Ashia's belongings were scattered across the room, furniture was overturned, and the evidence of a struggle was undeniable. Detectives asked themselves, was this a robbery gone wrong? If so, why was nothing valuable missing? Or could it have been a personal dispute? Ashia's loved ones insisted she had no known enemies, so who could have done this and why? As investigators worked to reconstruct the events of that night, they turned to the hotel's surveillance system. Cameras near the entrance and hallways provided a critical clue, footage showing a young man entering the hotel shortly before the reported gunshot. Who was this person? And what was his connection to Ashia? What do you think the surveillance footage revealed about his intentions? The man in the footage was dressed in a blue hooded sweatshirt, black Adidas pants, and black Nike shoes. He entered the hotel just before 11 p.m. and headed directly to Ashia's room. 20 minutes later, he was seen leaving in a hurry, his hood pulled tightly over his head. Detectives knew they were looking at their prime suspect. Meanwhile, forensic analysts worked tirelessly to comb through the evidence left behind in room 214. They found a single shell casing near Ashia's body, a crucial piece of evidence that matched the type of firearm later connected to the suspect. The trajectory of the fatal shot indicated a cold, calculated execution. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was deliberate. What do you think investigators felt as they uncovered each new piece of evidence? Do you believe they sensed the gravity of what had happened in that room? The investigation gained momentum when a tip from the public helped police identify the suspect, 17-year-old Carlos Lamar Scotland. His youth added another layer of complexity to the case. How could someone so young be involved in such a heinous crime? What events in his life had led him to this moment? When Scotland was brought in for questioning, his initial statements were vague and inconsistent. He claimed to have been at the hotel that night but denied involvement in the shooting. However, detectives noted his body language: nervous, evasive, avoiding eye contact. They pressed him further, and eventually his story began to unravel. Investigators uncovered deleted phone records showing multiple messages between Scotland and Ashia, pointing to prior communication between the two. The attempt to erase these records only strengthened the case against him. What do you think? Does trying to cover one's tracks suggest premeditation, or could it be an act of panic? As Scotland's alibi crumbled, he made a chilling confession. He admitted to meeting Ashia that night, claiming that their interaction took a dark turn when he discovered she was transgender. Scotland stated that he acted out of fear and rage, a confession that revealed the devastating power of ignorance and prejudice. This revelation shifted the narrative of the case. It was no longer just about a murder. It was about the deep-seated biases that can lead to violence against marginalized communities. Detectives and advocates alike were struck by the senselessness of the motive. How do you think society can address the ignorance that fuels such acts of violence? In the aftermath of Ashia Davis's tragic death, the community grappled with grief and a pressing demand for justice. The investigation led authorities to a young man whose actions would soon be scrutinized in a court of law. Carlos Lamar Scotland, 17 at the time of the incident, resided in Highland Park, Michigan. Details about his upbringing and personal life remain limited in public records. However, his youth and the severity of the crime prompted discussions about the factors that might have influenced his actions. Was it a moment of impulsivity, a reflection of deeper societal issues, or something else entirely? What drives a teenager to commit such a heinous act? On March 12, 2024, after an extensive investigation, Scotland was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, felony firearm possession, carrying a concealed weapon, and resisting and obstructing a police officer. The gravity of these charges underscored the seriousness of the crime and the community's demand for accountability. The courtroom became a focal point for the community's grief and quest for justice. During the trial, emotional testimonies painted a vivid picture of Ashia's life and the void left by her absence. Friends and family members spoke of her generosity, compassion, and the dreams she held for the future. Their words served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of this tragedy. In a particularly heart-wrenching moment, Jalisa Abad, a close friend of Ashia and a transgender advocate, recounted the harrowing scene she encountered. "The last memory that I have is seeing my friend on the floor outside of the hotel corner room with blood streaming all over the floor." Such testimonies highlighted the profound impact of the loss on those who knew and loved Ashia. Facing overwhelming evidence, including surveillance footage and forensic data, Scotland entered a plea agreement. In November 2024, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and a felony firearm charge. This decision spared the community a prolonged trial but did not diminish the weight of his actions. On January 10, 2025, the judge sentenced Scotland to 17 to 30 years in prison. While the sentence provided a measure of closure, it also served as a somber reflection on the consequences of violence and the enduring pain it inflicts on families and communities. The trial and sentencing prompted broader discussions about the safety and rights of transgender individuals, particularly Black transgender women who face disproportionate levels of violence. Advocates emphasized the need for systemic changes to protect marginalized communities and prevent such tragedies in the future. As we reflect on this case, it raises critical questions. How can society address the root causes of such violence? What measures can be implemented to ensure the safety and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their gender identity? Your thoughts and comments are essential as we navigate these pressing issues together. The tragedy of Ashia Davis's death was felt far beyond the walls of the Woodward Inn. For her family, friends, and the lled community, The loss was profound, a life full of promise and light, stolen in a moment of senseless violence. But the aftermath of her passing would become a call to action, a reflection of deeper issues, and a demand for change. For Ashia's family, the news of her death was shattering. Her mother, who had celebrated her daughter's recent nursing school graduation, now faced the unimaginable grief of burying her child. "She was my rock," her mother said through tears. Ashia had so many dreams to help others, to heal people, to make the world better. And now, she's gone. Her friends, too, were devastated. They described Ashia as a person who could make anyone feel special, someone who exuded kindness and strength. One friend said, "Ashia had this way of lifting people up. She saw the good in everyone, even when the world didn't see the good in her." If you've ever known someone like that, someone who leaves a mark on everyone they meet, you'll understand the depth of this loss. Do you have a memory of someone like Ashia in your life? Someone who made the world brighter just by being in it? The lled community in Detroit felt the sting of Ashia's loss in a deeply personal way. Vigils were held across the city, with candles lighting the night, as mourners shared stories of Ashia's generosity and resilience. Advocates like Julissa Abad, a close friend of Ashia's and a transgender rights leader, spoke passionately about the need for justice. "This isn't just about Ashia," she said. "This is about every trans woman who has faced violence, every life we've lost. Ashia deserves more than our grief, she deserves change." If you had been at one of those vigils, what would you have wanted to say to honor Ashia's memory? What message would you want her family to hear? Ashia's death was not an isolated incident. It was a grim reminder of a larger, more troubling reality: the epidemic of violence faced by Black transgender women in the United States. Since 2013, Black transgender women have accounted for the majority of fatal violence against transgender individuals. Their lives are cut short not only by physical attacks but by the systemic inequities that leave them vulnerable to such harm. Experts and advocates have pointed to the role of discrimination, lack of legal protections, and societal stigma. Tori Cooper, Director of Community Engagement for the Human Rights Campaign's Transgender Justice Initiatives, said, "Black transgender women are too often caught at the intersection of racism, sexism, and transphobia. This violence isn't random, it's systemic." What do you think society needs to do to address these systemic issues? How can we create a world where people like Ashia can thrive? Anti-transgender rhetoric in public discourse has only heightened the risks faced by the transgender community. Studies show that this type of language directly contributes to violence by dehumanizing individuals and fostering hatred. Advocates have called for greater accountability from leaders, media outlets, and influencers to counteract this dangerous trend. Do you think public figures should be held accountable for the impact of their words on vulnerable communities? What role do you think each of us can play in promoting acceptance and understanding? Ashia Davis's life was a story of courage and resilience. She overcame challenges, celebrated achievements, and dreamed of making the world a better place through her work in nursing. Her death is a tragic reminder of the prejudice that still exists, but her memory has sparked a renewed fight for justice and equality. Her family has vowed to honor her legacy by advocating for change. Ashia wanted to heal people, her mother said. If her story can help make this world safer for others like her, then maybe her death won't be in vain. As we reflect on Ashia's story, we must ask ourselves, what can we do to ensure her dreams live on? How can we challenge the biases and systems that perpetuate violence against transgender individuals? Share your thoughts in the comments, because creating a better world starts with conversations like these. Ashia's dreams were stolen, but her legacy is one of strength and love. Let's honor her memory by standing together, fighting for justice, and making this world a safer, kinder place for everyone. Ashia Davis's story is one that should never have had to be told. It is a story of a young woman who had overcome so much, who had achieved so much, and who had so much more to give to the world. Yet, her life was cut short by an act of senseless violence rooted in ignorance and prejudice. This case is not just about a single tragedy. It is a reflection of the broader issues that plague our society. We've walked through the events of that fateful night at the Woodward Inn, the investigation that followed, the courtroom where justice was sought, and the lasting impact on her family, her friends, and the lled to our community. Through it all, one truth stands clear. Ashia Davis's life mattered. Her dreams, her kindness, her resilience, they all mattered. This tragedy leaves behind so many questions. How can we, as a society, ensure that stories like Ashia's don't happen again? What steps can we take to create a world where everyone, regardless of their identity, feels safe and valued? These are questions we must all grapple with, not just for Ashia, but for every individual whose life has been touched by discrimination or violence. As we reflect on Ashia's story, let me ask you this: how do we protect those who face prejudice every day? How do we move from mourning lives lost to actively creating a safer, more inclusive society? Your voice matters in this conversation. What would you say to Ashia's family, her friends, or the countless others who fear for their safety simply because of who they are? We want to hear your thoughts. What actions do you believe we can take as individuals, as communities, and as a society to foster understanding and eliminate the biases that lead to tragedies like this? If you found Ashia's story important, if it moved you, or if it made you think, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others. Conversations like these are vital, and the more people who hear Ashia's story, the greater chance we have of making a difference. And if you want to hear more stories that dive deep into the human experience, stories that challenge us to think critically and act with compassion, please subscribe to this channel. Together we can shine a light on the stories that need to be told, honor the lives that have been lost, and work toward a future where everyone can live without fear. Thank you for watching, for reflecting, and for being a part of this important conversation. Let's keep Ashia's memory alive, not just in our hearts, but in the actions we take to create change.